Tonight we have 6 stories, from Cabin in the Woods stories, The Morgue, A Twisted Game, and more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. All of these stories were either submitted to my subreddit r/slumberreads, or sent directly to my email rylhstories@gmail.com. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. It's your stories that keep this channel going. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Okay, so I think it's fair to say we all expect creepy or unusual things with certain jobs. Late night security guards, groundskeeper for cemeteries, and especially mortuary jobs. Well, I fall into the latter. And yes, it is a job where I experience a lot of strange things. I didn't go into the job looking for things, but they are actually much more common than most in the industry would like to admit. 99% of any of the stuff you deal with is actually pretty mild or explainable. Some of the more common things are body bags moving slightly when you know the occupant is deceased, knocking coming from inside the cold storage, hearing groans or moans escape the lips of a recently dead person. All of this is common and explained away with logic for the most part. That brings me to the most recent development. I've recently gotten a new customer. A nice old lady who we will call Franny. No, it's not her real name, but it's a name that definitely suits her. Now, we've had no luck contacting her family, and her life insurance has long since lapsed. So our funeral parlor will be holding on to her for a bit longer than usual. This may seem strange, but as a small town, we try our best to give the family of the deceased time to determine what they wish to have done with the body. She seems to have other ideas in mind. Since she came in, my coworkers and I have reported hearing light-hearted laughter and chuckling coming from directly behind us at odd times when no one else is around. We find many of our supplies get moved or misplaced from where we last knew them to be. Franny herself has spooked me a couple of times, with me finding her laying on an autopsy table or even sitting up in my office chair when I open up in the morning. This would happen even though I made sure the night before everyone was in the cold storage. These pranks seemed harmless, but she's been here for almost a week and things have begun to escalate. Yesterday one of my assistants quit, telling me she couldn't handle any more of Franny. She went on to inform me that the final straw was when she found one of our male cadavers was missing his face. She looked through his chart and saw nothing indicating why it would be removed, and later, when she pulled out Franny's tray, she was wearing his face like a mask. It greatly disturbed her, and she ended up interrogating almost all of my staff on the highly inappropriate joke, when everyone she told seemed just as upset and disturbed by the event. She came to me. This morning my assistant Charles was working on a local boys embalming, and I was in my office going over today's showing. I was just about to finish when I heard Charles call out in pain. Thinking he had slipped or something, I ran to check on him. I found him lying in an ever-increasing pool of blood while he held his neck. I quickly dialed 911, and the ambulance got there in time. He's stable at the local hospital. He swears to the doctors that a scalpel flew across the room as if it had been thrown at him. I'm certain the whole office will be investigated, but I don't think they'll arrest anyone. When they took Charles out, I made a point to take pictures of the scene. I was just scrolling through those, and now currently staring at Franny's tray sitting wide open. It's empty, and when the police let me back in the office, I'll make certain that's the case. Until then, I can only speculate, but I have a feeling the mischievous old lady is out and about. How do I tell the police they need to be looking for a corpse? I awake in the dead of night, and the room feels bone-chilling cold around me. For a minute, I lay stupid in my bed trying to collect my thoughts. Why the hell am I awake? As I ask myself this, I turn to look at the clock on my nightstand, but the illuminating red light that normally faintly lights up the room is gone black. The generator must have gone out. Now that I'm fully awake, this strikes me as odd. I remember topping up the gas before going to bed. Why is the power gone? I ask myself again, as panic begins to set in. I reach for the flashlight that I keep by the side of my bed. I feel around for the switch and turn it on. I shine the light around the room. The night is silent, and the only noise heard is the sound of my dog snoring at the foot of my bed. I reach for my coat that's hanging from the hook on the back of my closed door. I wrap it around my bare skin to provide me some warmth. The generator must have been out for some time now, because the temperature inside the cabin is close to freezing. I rest the flashlight on the kitchen table as I button up my jacket. I head out the front door, but not before grabbing the hunting rifle from the rack. I find myself standing on the patio in the dead of night. I stand silently still, listening to the trees rustle in the winter's wind. The cold air burns my nostrils, and the warm air that filled my lungs was replaced with cold. For a moment, all worry leaves my body, and I remain standing there captivated in the moment and how peaceful night can be. There's a light blanket of snow now covering the ground. Leaves of autumn that lay rotting on the ground earlier today are now hidden underneath. The weather here changes quickly. In the dead of nightfall, turned into winter, and it changed quickly. I remain standing on the patio and start to shine the flashlight around the darkness to make sure there are no bears or wolves hanging around to turn me into their late night snack. After all, I'm in the middle of the wilderness. I was content that there was no danger lurking for me in the shadows, so I started to make my way to the generator shack that stood only a few feet from the cabin. The snow crunches under the weight of my feet. As I make my way through the snow into the generator shack, the door is slightly open. Most likely from the wind. I push it fully open and shine the light inside. I slowly make my way inside and pull the door shut behind me to prevent any more snow from drifting in behind me. Once inside, I found the gas can that I used to refill the generator. I removed the lid from the generator tank. But before I poured any gas in, I shined the light inside. It's still almost full. I stood there frozen, and for a moment, I seriously thought I was sleepwalking or stuck inside a dream. But the cold air on the back of my neck was a reminder that I was wide awake. A sense of panic began to sink in when I realized that someone had to have turned the generator off. I'm far from civilization, and the only way this deep into the wilderness is by snowmobile. I stand there still frozen, baffled by this discovery. Am I going mad? My thoughts are quickly intruded by the sound of movement outside the shack. I can hear footsteps in the snow outside growing closer and closer. When it reaches the side of the shack, the footsteps stop, directly on the other side of the wall from me. I find the courage to speak. I manage to get out 2 words. "Who's there?" I say as my voice starts to crack. I pause and wait for a response, but no reply follows. All I can hear is heavy breathing coming from the other side of the wall. I raise the rifle slowly and point it towards the breathing. I turn the safety off and ask once more, "Who's there?" This time loud and clear to ensure that I was heard. Still no reply. I hold the rifle more firmly now. The adrenaline has worn off and my hands are no longer shaking. I ask one last time, "Who's there?" This time something hits the side of the shack, hard enough to startle me and cause me to lose my balance. It caused me to fall backward, landing on my ass. Pulling the trigger of the rifle while doing so, the bullet rips holes through the walls, allowing the light from the moon to seep through. I cock the rifle and steady my aim, ready for whatever comes next. The sound of the empty shell hitting the wooden floor breaks the silence. For a second I was convinced that whatever was outside the shack was either dead or took off running scared. But that's when I noticed in one of the bullet holes there was a yellow eye peering through and looking straight at me. Before I got a chance to react and fire another shot, the yellow eye disappeared. Then the wall of the shack was torn clean off as if it were made of paper. Now the moon lit up the darkness fully, and I can see the intruder in the illuminating light. Standing in front of me was neither human nor animal. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. There was a creature standing right in front of me. It looked like something straight from a nightmare. It stood there on 2 bony legs that could easily be mistaken for tree branches. It was taller than any human I've ever seen. It must be at least 8 feet tall. Its torso looked like some sort of raven, bearing feathers like skin. Its head looked distinctly human-like, only its skin was gray and eyes were bright yellow. I pointed the barrel of the rifle towards the creature once again. I pulled the trigger, knocking the creature back. I used this chance to get to my feet and take off running towards the cabin. My heart was beating in my chest as I struggled to get through the snow. I was almost to the cabin, and when I reached the steps, something grabbed my ankles and pulled them out from underneath me and face first into the snow. As I turned over, the creature was now on me with its claws penetrating into my ankles. The pain was excruciating as it started to rip my flesh open right in front of me. I reached for the rifle in the snow beside me. I grabbed it with my fingertips and slowly inched it towards my grip. I managed to wrap my hands around it. I quickly raised the barrel and squeezed the trigger for the 4th time tonight, but instead of a loud bang, all I heard was a click. The chamber was empty, and I was about to be torn apart limb by limb. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to make it out alive. I dropped the rifle to my side, and this time I picked it up by the barrel instead. I raised it as high as I could, and brought the stock of the rifle as hard as I could, striking the creature in the head. The blow to the head caused the creature to fall off me and backwards into the snow. I got to my feet and made my way up over the stairs to the cabin. My ankles felt like they were about to fall off, but I fought through the pain, and I was finally at the front door. My sleeping dog was now at the door barking frantically, and as I opened the door, she tried to squeeze past me and take off towards the creature, but I managed to push her back into the safety of the cabin. Once I made it inside, I locked the door behind me. I wasn't sure how safe I really was inside, but the idea of a locked door brought me some comfort. I collapsed on the floor and fought to catch my breath, my heart still beating out of my chest. I rolled over to look out the glass in the door, and I realized the creature was no longer laying in the snow bleeding out. Instead, I could see a fresh track leaving the blood-stained snow and heading back into the woods. I limped around the inside of the cabin looking for my phone. I remembered putting it on the counter before going to sleep so that it would charge overnight. I grabbed it and dialed the only 3 numbers that came to mind. 911. I hit the call button, but instead of hearing the comforting voice of a 911 operator, all I heard was silence. I looked at my phone screen once again, and in the top right-hand corner it said no service. The snow and wind during the night must have knocked out the nearby cell tower. The service was horrible here during the best of the day. A feeling of panic started to return. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with no one around, only a creature lurking outside the cabin that wanted to kill me. What the hell am I going to do? I found the first aid kit in the cabinet underneath the bathroom sink and started to patch up my wound. The cuts were deep, and I knew that the bandages would only provide a temporary fix, and I needed to get back to civilization quickly to have them looked at by a professional. The sting from the rubbing alcohol I poured over the wound to keep it from getting infected burned underneath the bandages. Now that the bleeding had stopped for the time being, I knew I had to find a way out of here. I rummaged around the cabin searching for some more shells for my rifle. I knew there were some in the generator shack, but that was out of the question now. I found some loose ones in the junk drawer. There were only a few, so I had to make them count. I loaded the chamber to ready myself for when the creature returned. I knew it was only a matter of time. I checked all the windows to search for any sign of the creature. When I looked out the window in the back door, I could see off in the distance, just at the edge of the tree line, a pair of yellow eyes looking towards the cabin. There it was, standing, watching, waiting for me to go outside again to finish what it had started. The only chance I have of getting out of here is the snowmobile parked in front of the cabin. The only problem is getting to it. The creature was faster than me. There was no denying this. I have to make some sort of diversion to draw its focus off me long enough to make my escape. It wouldn't be easy though, and to make it even more of a challenge, I have to get my dog out safe with me as well. I can't leave her here alone. She wouldn't last against the creature no matter how strong she thinks she is. Some time went by, and now was the time to act. I checked the back door again, and the eyes were still seen off in the distance. I was surprised it hadn't come back by now. The way that it tore through the generator shack earlier, it probably could do the same with the cabin walls. Instead, the creature stood there passing time, playing a long game, and waiting for me to stick my neck outside again so that it could get me. I walked slowly and quietly to one of the rooms in the cabin, and carefully slid open the window, trying my best to not make a sound. From there, I was directly over my patio. I worked up the courage to lean out the window and reach down to the patio below. There was a small gallon of gas beside the barbecue that I had placed there earlier that day when I filled up the chainsaw. I grabbed it, but it was stuck to the patio. The moisture on the can must have caused the can of gas to freeze to the patio during the night. I pulled on it with some force, and it came free, but at the same time, the patio underneath made a cracking noise. The creature must have good ears because as I pulled myself back inside the cabin, I could hear the creature let out some sort of squeal, and the sound of its footsteps were coming toward the cabin, and fast. I pulled the window closed and locked it just in time. The creature now had its face pressed against the glass, and I could see its breath hitting the glass, causing the window to steam up. It stood there still, trying to intimidate me, but I wouldn't show it any fear, even though deep down inside, I was scared to death. needed to see me afraid, and I wouldn't feed it any fear. I got to my feet with a gas can in hand and pulled the curtains shut so that it couldn't see inside. I had to draw it away from the cabin, but before I got to that, I started to put my plan in motion. I started to fill half a dozen beer bottles full of gas, and then dipped a rag inside each one. I had seen people make Molotovs on television, but I had never had the need to do it myself. I wasn't sure if it would even work, or if it was pointless, but I continued to fill the bottles until the gas can was empty. I lined them up near the back door, ready to make my move. The one last piece of the puzzle was needed before my escape would start. I put the dog inside my backpack and let her head stick out. Thankfully, she was only a medium-sized dog, and I was able to put her on my back. Then I grabbed a package from my bedroom that I had bought a while back, but didn't think I would ever use it. But now was the time. I went back to the back door and opened up the package, and from inside, I pulled out a bear banger and assembled it. Not sure if this would do the trick, but it was the only option I had left. I opened the back door quietly, and just enough to stick the bear banger out the door. I aimed it across the bog, and toward the tree line where the creature was standing before. I wasn't sure where it was right now, but I was hoping it would follow the noise. I squeezed the cap of the banger and fired it in that direction. My ears started to ring from the bang from the cap, but it did the trick. As quick as I fired the shot, the creature came out from underneath the cabin and took off running towards the tree line. It must have thought that it was chasing after me. I guess its eyesight isn't as good as its ears. Now that the creature was a safe distance away, I lit each Molotov individually and tossed them as far away from the cabin as I could, and before I knew it, the bog was ablaze. I used the distraction to make my way out the front door and onto the snowmobile. I strapped the rifle to the side of the seat beside me, and my dog was still safely on my back behind me. She was growling underneath her breath, ready to attack if the creature came back. With a turn of the key, the snowmobile rumbled underneath me, and the sound of the engine drowned out the howls of the creature coming across the bog. I didn't turn to see if it had heard me. I just looked straight ahead and squeezed the throttle of the snowmobile hard and sped off into the night. A few months later, spring has arrived, and my physical wounds have healed from that night at the cabin. Deep down inside, though, I was still shaken to the bone. I narrowly escaped death that night, and the thought of the creature has haunted me ever since. I awake almost nightly in a pool of my own sweat from nightmares of the creature. The nightmares are so vivid I can see its yellow eyes and its claws tearing through my legs. I look down at my feet, and the scars of that night remind me just how close I came to dying that night. Everyone thinks I went crazy up in the woods that night, and they try to convince me that the wounds must be from some mountain cats, and that the creature I was describing wasn't real. The wildlife department sent officers to the cabin a few weeks after the incident, and they reported finding nothing. They said all they found was a sign of the fire on the bog from the Molotovs, and a destroyed generator shack. The company that I worked for deducted the repairs to the shack and cabin from my final check, and then terminated my position. They told me I was too big of a liability to return to the cabin. I didn't care too much because I personally didn't want to return myself. I was just more pissed off that no one believed me. Now that spring is here though, I keep telling myself that I will return there on my own to find proof of what I saw that night. Some sort of evidence, just to prove everyone around me wrong. I don't know if I can do it on my own. The wounds and scars of that night run deeper than my flesh, and it's something that I'll have to carry with me until my dying day. Until then though, it will haunt me. It will eat me alive. Maybe one day, I'll work up the courage to return to the cabin in the wilderness. My husband and I moved to Arizona in the spring of 2007. By spring of 2008, we bought our first home and had settled in with our 2 small children and 2 dogs. The first few weeks we heard things and dismissed them straight away as the house settling. It was a new built home on what was once farmland. The first paranormal experience I had, that I recognized as such, came a few months after we settled in. My husband took the dogs for an afternoon to the park. My son, at the time, was 6, and my daughter had recently turned 5. I was folding laundry in our bedroom and heard a door shut. Shortly thereafter, thinking my children would run into the bedroom, I called out to them, "Hey guys, how was the park?" I heard a reply, "Hi mommy," in what sounded like my daughter's voice. I responded saying, "Come in here," and then there was silence. I got up, walked all around the house, checked the driveway. They weren't home. I brushed the experience off at the time. Small things occurred after that. Nothing major, but in 2009, my in-laws moved in with us for a short period while they were awaiting their home to be available. It was not the best of times, but we survived it. I digress. One night, while I was pregnant with my third child and my husband was pulling overtime, my mother-in-law sat at a computer desk that we had in our living room while I watched television and finished up some work for the day. I could see my mother-in-law at the computer while I watched television. My two children were just laid down to bed prior to my turning on the television. The hallway from the bedrooms led into the kitchen, and from the living room where I sat, you could just see the island countertop in the kitchen. I completed some of my work on the laptop and shut the laptop down. As I looked up toward the television, I saw my daughter dart from the hallway toward the island and walk behind the island, just out of sight. As I turned my head toward the kitchen, so did my mother-in-law's head. I told my daughter, "It's time for bed. No more water." I didn't get a response, and figured she was playing games, avoiding bedtime as many children do. I got up and walked into the kitchen expecting to find her hiding from me. My daughter was just about the height of the counter, her head just peeking over the island anytime she was near it. I walked around the island, and my daughter wasn't there. I went to my daughter's bedroom where she was sleeping, knocked out from a hard day of being a kid. Not the fake sleep that kids try to pull off when they know they've been found out by their parent and aren't actually sleeping. I checked on my son, who was also sleeping sound in his bedroom. I walked back into the living room and my mother-in-law says, "I thought I was going crazy." Realizing she saw it at the same time I did, I asked her if she'd seen anything like that before, and she said, "No, but I've heard a little girl's voice when the kids aren't home." No further occurrences to that magnitude had occurred that rattled any of us. Small sights of this little girl, who never got any taller than the counter height, little whispers, doors shutting on their own, those became commonplace. We even caught a recording of her saying hello when my son was using an old voice recorder for a school project. We sold that home and bought a new home about a year ago. We often talk about how the little girl, now as our new home, is quiet. Often, this new home feels too quiet, and I wonder who that little girl was, what she was. Sometimes I think I should contact the new owners and ask them if they've experienced her presence, but then I'd sound crazy, right? For now, I think I'm content with leaving that memory here and just being grateful that we got to experience something for 11 years that not many people get to experience. The crashing sound was the last sound Jeremiah heard before everything faded to black. The next sound he heard was muffled cheering from a large crowd. "What the hell?" Jeremiah said, as he awoke and found himself lying on a cot in the middle of a windowless room. "Oh, good. You're awake. You're up in 5. The host is just finishing up the last contestant's finale," a woman in a clean white suit said as she checked something off on a clipboard in her hand. "What? Where am I?" He looked around the room as he sat up. There were cheerful posters on the walls of people standing in front of large crowds with the words "The Game" in big bold print written all over them. The vibe was distinctly waiting room, but Jeremiah had no idea how he got there. The last thing he remembered was driving home from work that night. The woman made a tisk sound and continued checking things off on her clipboard. "You're in the waiting lobby for contestants of the game. Now get a move on. You're up." Not really knowing what else to do, Jeremiah did what he was told. He was quickly ushered onto a large stage, where a man in another clean white suit stood with a microphone in his hand. Mirroring the posters, a large crowd also filled what looked like an auditorium, which blared a loud white noise of cheers and claps. And here we have our next contestant, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give a big cheer for Jeremiah. The man's voice boomed into the microphone in the best game show host impression that Jeremiah had ever heard. The crowd, as expected, cheered even louder than before. The fervor coming from the audience could have rivaled any sporting event, Jeremiah thought. "Say hello, Jeremiah." The game show host continued as he shoved the glittery microphone into Jeremiah's hands. Hello?" he said uncertainly. The crowd continued to cheer, but it was evident that several boos began to break out. "I'm Jeremiah. I don't really know what I'm doing here." That was met with more boos. The host gave a hearty fake laugh and took the microphone back. With a flamboyant gesture, he beamed to the crowd and began to explain the game. We got a joker here, don't we, audience? Well, I guess we'll have to explain the rules then, won't we? He gave a rakish wink to the crowd, which seemed to excite them even more. That didn't stop them from booing, though. The game is simple. Our contestants sign up for the game, and when their time is up, they're brought on the stage to be evaluated by our esteemed audience and viewers at home. From there, we go through various stages of the game you've played, and the audience will use these to decide whether they will vote for a second chance or game over. He said the last two words in a mock, ominous tone. The crowd's enthusiasm surged at the end of the host's little speech. Jeremiah stood there, thoroughly perplexed over the situation he found himself in. He couldn't recall ever signing up for a game, much less something as insipid as the game. And even if he had, it still didn't explain how he woke up in the waiting room with no memory of how he got there in the first place. He also couldn't recall going through any stages, like the host mentioned. Jeremiah thought of himself as an average guy with an average life, and an average family, not someone who would sign up for some kind of game. There wasn't really anything special or daring in the 35 years of his life, except for him finding true love at such an early age, and having 2 adorable young children. Whatever, Jeremiah thought to himself. Hopefully this won't take too long. Madeline must be worried sick by now. I'll just get through whatever this is and then go home. At least I'll have an interesting story to tell her. And now, let's get into the reveal, folks. The host continued in that same exaggerated game show voice. It seemed impossible, but the crowd got even louder upon hearing this game had moved on to the next stage. To the back of the platform, a large white canvas dropped, and a video was projected onto it, much like it would in a movie theater. There, in front of everyone, clips of Jeremiah's life began to play. He stood there, transfixed as both painful and happy memories played as entertainment for the masses. What was crazy, Jeremiah realized, was that he never saw any form of cameras that would indicate someone was recording these events. Even crazier, the moments encompassed his entire life, not just his adult years, where he'd have likely signed up for whatever game this was. Ah, folks, wasn't Jeremiah just the most adorable baby you've ever seen? The host crooned into the microphone, and was quickly met with several ahs from the crowd. Jeremiah's cheeks flared red, embarrassed over seeing himself naked and splashing in his parents' kitchen sink as they bathed him. The movie quickly jumped to another scene of him having his ass thoroughly kicked in a fight between himself and 3 boys in high school. He remembered that fight. One of the boys had taken a liking to Madeline, at the time his girlfriend, and was trying to assault her at a party where they were at. He had quickly stepped in, trying to save her from the ravishings of his drunk classmate. He managed to stop it from happening, but the ensuing fight between the boy and his friends had landed him in the emergency room with a broken eye socket and several cracked ribs. The scene changed to himself and Madeline in the hospital room, with her sobbing over what almost happened. Jeremiah felt the same surge of protectiveness he felt that night as he watched his beautiful wife cry, and mouth along with the words that came out of some invisible speaker. Madeline, I'm fine. I love you. I will never let anyone ever hurt you. Ever. The movie, Madeline had stopped crying and hugged him. True love right there, folks. Didn't you and Madeline end up getting married right out of high school, Jeremiah? I think the audience would agree with me when I say that I cried during your proposal. Right, crowd? The audience echoed his sentiment. The host, however, didn't give Jeremiah a chance to respond before moving along to the next segment. But every love story has some tragedy in it, right? Who could forget this scene? The host made a grand gesture back towards the canvas, where the memory of Jeremiah cheating on his wife played, followed by her crushing reaction to the news. The memory was like a knife twisting in Jeremiah's heart. He had hardly recalled the night it happened. He had just stormed out of the house he shared with her, after having an explosive fight over something he couldn't remember. He knew it was bad enough to make him drive to a nearby bar and drink his anger away. Inebriated, he had made the worst decision of his life and slept with a woman he had never met before. When he had woken up the following morning and realized what he had done, he rushed straight home and confessed everything to Madeline. He would never forget the look on her face as she crumpled to the floor and broke into heart-shattering sobs. He had fallen down beside her and cried as well. Jeremiah was a fortunate man that she had forgiven him, and he knew it. He spent the next 14 years after that trying to make it up to her. She had always told him she didn't hold it against him anymore, and knew how he truly felt, but he could never quite move past the guilt he felt that morning. The crowd's mood instantly changed from ruckus and enthusiastic to angry and menacing. It was at that moment that Jeremiah became afraid. He knew with absolute certainty that no matter what was shown next on that screen, it wouldn't erase the serious stain on his life and character. He knew with absolute certainty that his life was truly over because of that one grave mistake. He didn't know how he knew, but it was like a primal instinct or fear had woken up inside him, and that instinct knew the game was a matter of life and death. Beads of sweat began to trickle down his face as the fear began to overtake him. Jeremiah found himself utterly mute, unable to tell the crowd, anyone, that he loved his wife and his children. He was unable to tell them how horrible he felt, even to this day, for making that one mistake, or the promise he made to himself, or how he would never hurt Madeline again. The host looked down gravely with a look of mock concern on his face. Folks, we know that what Jeremiah did was terrible, but remember, we all make mistakes, and let's not forget that he spent the rest of his time being a dutiful husband. The audience didn't seem to care though, and continued to hiss and boo at Jeremiah. But just as Jeremiah finally found his voice, the host looked back up with a winning smile and said, "Well, audience, and our viewers at home, it's time to vote. Will Jeremiah get a second chance, or will this be a game over? Vote now on your phones. Vote early, vote often. The polls will close in 5 minutes." With a final flourish of his hands, the host fell silent. At once, the crowd took out their devices, and the screen changed from Jeremiah and Madeline on the floor to a poll with the options: second chance and game over. Immediately, the game over option began filling quickly, with second chance filling at a much slower pace. Jeremiah, now panicking, ran to the host and yanked the microphone out of his hand. The host protested loudly, but he didn't care. He knew he had to say something, anything to get the crowd to change their minds. "Listen, I'm a good person. I love my wife. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake, and she forgave me. I spent every moment since then making it up to her, and I'll continue doing that till the day I die. Please, please." His pleas did nothing to sway his silent judges, as the numbers continued to surge for game over. Yet, it was at that moment that another figure walked onto the stage. He was tall and silent. He was dressed, not in a white suit like the host or the lady in the waiting room, but in a brilliant inky black tunic suit. His skin seemed to shine and gave off a sense of awe and power. Jeremiah realized the fear he felt before was nothing compared to the total dread this man inspired inside of him. Jeremiah knew, with every molecule inside him, that this man was his creator, and worse, his executioner. He wanted to run, to escape like a scared animal fleeing from an apex predator, but found himself glued to the spot as the man's eyes fixated on him. The look on the man's face was one of solemn sadness. It was as if he could look deep inside Jeremiah, and everything was laid bare. There were no secrets between this mysterious stranger and Jeremiah. Every thought, wish, fear was his to witness and experience as well. The host grabbed the microphone back from Jeremiah roughly and did his best to put the rakish smile back on his face. "Well, my. Isn't this an unexpected surprise? Creator is here, everyone. Let's give a huge welcome to Creator." The crowd, transfixed upon the awe-inspiring man, began whispering excitedly. They knew that Creator never came out on stage for contestants. This was truly a rare moment in the history of the game. Creator turned to smile slightly at the crowd. A few fainted in their seats, having been overwhelmed by the sight of his eyes. The host, in what was his usual game show gusto, spoke into the microphone. "What brings our beloved Creator here today?" He gave a quick, fake gasp. "Are you here to give us your opinion on what should be chosen for Jeremiah?" The crowd echoed the host's gasp and stopped their voting. Their attention became completely fixated on what was happening on the stage. Jeremiah could only stand there, his gaze never wavering from Creator, while terrified. He knew his life rested in this man's hands. Creator slowly turned towards Jeremiah and looked as though he was pondering everything there was about him. Flashes of Jeremiah's life began to play on the screen again in a quick succession, starting with the moment of his birth and ended with a black scene and a loud crashing sound. He then turned back towards the crowd and lifted both of his hands with the palms of his hands facing upwards. This seemed to be some sort of signal for the audience, as they broke out in shocked gasps that were quickly followed with the loudest cheers yet. The host, with a look of pure astonishment on his face, screamed into the microphone, "In all my years of playing, your humble host, I have never seen Creator give a contestant the second chance signal. We are witnessing history today, folks." The crowd screamed with enthusiasm and grabbed their devices to change their choices. The numbers of the polls quickly reversed with second chance soaring to a near total voting count. The host looked beside himself at the rapid change and continued, "I have never seen such a turnaround so late in the game. My, could we be witnessing a second moment in history?" Just then, a loud buzzer went off somewhere, indicating the voting period was over. Esteemed audience and viewers at home, your host is absolutely flabbergasted in your decision, and I can honestly say that this has never happened before. Well, Jeremiah, it looks like you're one lucky son of a gun. You've won. Congratulations on winning a second chance in the game. The crowd stood and cheered, shouting Jeremiah over and over again. Creator, however, continued to look solemn as he walked over to Jeremiah. Jeremiah stayed rooted in the spot, absolutely terrified over what was going to happen next. But he had won. Won what exactly? At that thought, Creator placed his palms on Jeremiah's chest. A jolt of electricity surged out of his hands and into Jeremiah. Suddenly, everything in Jeremiah's world was on fire. He couldn't breathe, scream, or even react to the life-inducing current coursing through his body. Creator sent another surge of electricity, and the world went dark for Jeremiah. Slowly, the world came back to him as yells of "clear" reverberated off the walls of a brightly lit hospital room. His eyes fluttered open, and he saw a group of people standing over him, all wearing scrubs. "Oh, thank God. Jeremiah. Jeremiah, can you hear me? This is Dr. Rosen. You've been in a car accident, Jeremiah, but you're going to be fine." Jeremiah blinked at the bright lights and whispered, "Did I die?" The doctor smiled slightly and answered, "Yeah, but thank God we were able to revive you. Looks like you got a second chance." At those words, Jeremiah heard the faint sound of a crowd cheering and chanting his name. Here I stay, in a winter cottage alone, inside a forest in the middle of nowhere. I have a horrible Wi-Fi connection that goes out for days at a time, but for the most part, it gets the job done. I wish I didn't have to stay here, but when Grandpa died, his last wish was for me to have his cabin, and in a way, I feel as though I'm honoring his last wish by making use of it. I know I'll get tired of the isolation one day, but for right now, I've come to enjoy it. I can't stand people. They're just too hard to get along with for me. I feel like I can't say a single word without hurting someone's little feelings, or making someone judge me. So I guess this cabin was a blessing in disguise. Anyway, I'm writing here to ask for opinions on something. There's been a series of events recently that's left me questioning what's real in the world. Every night I feel like I'm being watched. There's a window in front of the foot of my bed, and I would have dreams normally at night for the start of it, but then my dreams always end with someone involved getting the most bloody death imaginable. After the death ends in the dream, well, nightmare I suppose, I always see two glowing red eyes with a wolf howl in the background, and when I wake up, my eyes are immediately drawn to the window, but nothing's there. Always nothing. I don't really know what I expect to see though. I should mention, I don't take any drugs or drink any alcohol or anything. I also don't have any mental health issues that I know of. Besides the disturbing dreams, I also notice dead animals being left at my doorstep every morning for the past week now. All of these animals have their insides opened up, with every bone in the body broken, so whenever I try and remove it, It all falls apart in my hands, like a bag of bloody jello. It's disgusting. I tried to get to the bottom of this ever since the animal started appearing a week ago, but I've had no luck. The only thing I know of that does something slightly similar to this is a cat, but there's moose and deer and other large animals being obliterated, so I know a regular cat couldn't do this. Maybe a lion or something, but that would be beyond pointless for them. And I'm not in Africa, so the only other viable option I think would be a human. Some twisted motherfucker at that, but I should still be able to catch them on camera, so I'll install a security system tomorrow. I'll post here the day after and let you guys know what I found, but until then, here I stay. So as an update from last time, I installed the cameras, but I haven't caught anything definitive yet. Just large black masses that seem to sprint at nearly incomprehensible speed. It almost seems like a blur. I say almost because I saw its elbows and torso, along with distinct features on its head, such as dog ears. I put 2 and 2 together and thought that this is very similar to what I see staring at me in the window before I wake up from the nightmares. But whatever this is, I can't determine. I just found it so odd how I never see it when I wake up, but it clearly is there. Maybe it just runs off at the same incredible speed as soon as I start to regain movement. That's why I never see it. I don't know. But I'm worried still. It's starting to get more aggressive, and even leaves scratches on the front door of the cabin now. Whatever it is, it's almost starting to climb on top of the roof, as well as make strange sounds during the entire night. I try and sleep. It's getting bolder, is what I'm trying to say. That, or it's getting upset that I'm not understanding what it's trying to tell me, but I don't speak its language. Whatever language that might be. Today I went outside to find yet another bloody deer carcass on my doorstep. As I did the usual routine of removing it, I heard growling from the woodline. It sounded malicious, as if it wanted to saw my neck off with a rusty saw, and stare me in the eye. Well, it didn't. This thing hated me. I went outside so I could start my car up for work in the city. It's about an hour-long drive, so I try and make sure I have everything I need while the car is heating up. For some reason my eyes were drawn to the edge of the forest again. And just when I turned my head, whatever was growling at me stopped and ran off, causing trees to part ways as it moved. I have a bad feeling about tonight. I was thinking about staying over at a friend's house just for tonight and head back in the morning. I think it's a good idea because I can also see if I still get the nightmares. But I'm afraid to leave my home to that thing. I guess I'll just have to wait and see what happens. If I can't live there peacefully anymore, then I'll have to pay some hunters to track and kill it. I'm headed to work now, and I'll post later with another update. But until that time comes, here I stay. So I decided in the end that I'd just have a friend stay over a couple of nights with me at the cabin, instead of going over there to them. If this thing is indeed real, and not just a part of my imagination, then I would want some kind of vindication by someone else seeing it. The friend in question, Drew, is with me now. Well, he's in the bathroom taking a piss or something. But what I'm concerned with is that earlier today when I got home from work, there was a black Suburban parked on the side of the driveway that leads up to the cabin. I make the trip to and from work every day for the past year, and some change now. I never noticed anyone parked there before. It's not even a real road. I drove past it, albeit very slowly to see if I could see anyone in it, but nothing. So I just said screw it and sped up and got back home. I called my friend immediately after I fixed a sandwich, or it might have been a microwave burrito. I don't know. But I asked if he knew anything about the black vehicle on the path up to the cabin. He said he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. We chatted about other things and all, and I asked him if he wanted to come stay over and play some Xbox on my much larger TV. And this is where we are now. The thing is, we got here about an hour after we hung up. He lives in the city. I asked him if he saw the vehicle on his way up, and he said he had, but it was taking off as soon as he was driving by. He said it was 2 men in it, with dark shades and suits. Then he switched to another subject after he said that. He asked me why it was so cold in the cabin after looking at the heaters I had positioned in every room. I told him the obvious answer, which is, of course, I don't know. Then he made a remark about hearing a low growl when he stepped out of his car. We spent the rest of the day playing Xbox and eating microwave foods before we called it a day, and went into separate rooms, and before long, nighttime came. This night was different though. It was a complete full moon, and the coldness from earlier felt like it instantly vanished and was replaced by a stuffy or drowsy feeling. It was so bad I actually felt like I had to open the window. Now, where I live, there's no snow on the ground. Just yet. But it is very cold nonetheless. When I opened the window, it looked as if all the grass was swaying in the same direction of how I opened it, which is forward. I could hear a strong wind, but that was it. There was no sound. I turned everything off to see if I was hearing this correctly, but nothing changed. I was about to go ask my friend if he could see the same thing, but when I got to his room, he was already meeting me halfway. I asked him what was up, and he said he didn't feel right and thought someone was watching him. At that same time, we heard a loud, thunderous boom. I could immediately tell the door had either been kicked down or was in the process of it. We then both scrambled to my room, thinking someone is here to rob the place. My room is where I kept the firearms at. Now, I was a terrible shot, and my friend wasn't that much better than me, but it made us feel safe nonetheless. As we're loading up our weapons, I took the 357, and since he's a better shot, I left him with the almighty judge. Hearing heavy footsteps, causing the floorboards to creak, we aim for the doorway and wait, but until we see the intruder, here I stay. Okay, so things have been real hectic since last time I posted here, and I managed to find some free time again to post. You won't believe what happened. So Drew is all banged up pretty bad in the hospital now, thanks to that monstrosity of a creature. They don't know if he'll make it. Last time, we had weapons drawn and pointed at the thing that came through the door. It was large in every way possible. It was nearly 8 feet tall and had muscles poking out underneath its fur, which was all over its body, but less in places the muscles was more dense. It had razor sharp teeth like a damn wolf and ears like one too. It was grinning. The grin, it haunts me even when I'm not sleeping. It knew that it had us trapped. Before either one of us could move again, it stepped through the doorway bending down so its head could fit inside. What I sensed from the creature was that it was somehow nourished from human terror. As soon as it let loose a terrifying low growl, Drew shot the thing with the judge. It blew him back by a few feet, but the thing looked like a robot malfunctioning, rather than a flesh creature in pain. It did not look hurt enough, but rather confused. Almost like it was confused we had any type of offense whatsoever, no matter how meager and insignificant it was. It then stepped closer, and Drew fired again while I unloaded the 357 into it as well, but to no effect. It just laughed off the shots, but it still kept walking towards us. It stopped for a second, sniffed the air before turning its head to Drew, who was already reloading. At that time, I observed it closer, and noticed the bullets had been hitting it with the marks it left on the thing looked like paper cuts. They must have all grazed off of it somehow, even though some I knew hit it dead on. When the creature got to Drew, he started to swipe at his ankles, causing Drew to back up on the bed, right next to the window. Then the creature charged at him and took Drew along with himself out the window, shattering it. I finished reloading and tried to provide some support as soon as I saw them go through the window, but when I looked out, they already hit the ground outside. The creature on top of Drew, but it froze in place. When a howl erupted from the surrounding forest, it then sniffled the air towards the tree line and broke out into a sprint, trampling over Drew in the process. So, after I saw it leave, I got everything ready and helped a bloody and bruised Drew off the ground. He wasn't really responding too well. I drove him to the hospital. He's been in ICU for a couple of days now, and I've been staying at a hotel. I searched online about what it could have possibly been, and everything leads toward a dogman. I would have thought it was a werewolf, if not for the primal atmosphere it gave off. But anyway, I'm ready to put it behind me now. I got all my essentials out of that cabin, and I don't plan on going back. But just to leave you guys with one last gruesome detail, when I went back to grab most of my things like my laptop, Xbox, etc., there was a police car outside of my cabin with the lights still on, the engine still running, but when I got to the door, there was his body, all laid out in pieces, dismembered, guts everywhere. It looked like he was exploded by a landmine or whatever, and on the front of the cabin door was written in his blood what looked like the word "go." I thought to myself, that could have been me. And that doorstep could have been where I stayed. "You're not gonna buy that," she said with a frown on her face. "Come on, it's great," I said sheepishly. Several other shoppers were looking amused at us. It had been a beautiful morning. All our household chores had been done early, so we decided to go to the area swap meet and look around. There were lots of people there with apparently the same idea. Halfway through the flea market, we came across a small booth with occult books, ghost stories, and other spooky knickknacks. Being a super fan of all things supernatural, I, of course, wanted to stop. Reluctantly, Renee said okay. Among all the stuff, I had found a very cool rug of a staircase going down. It looked so real, I just had to have it. Being the frugal shopper that she was, Renee didn't like me buying Goonie junk. Goonie was our word for silly or goofy. The old lady that ran the booth, hearing our discussion, said smiling, "That's one of our oldest items. It came from the old country with my family. If you really like it, I can let you have it for half price today." The price on the tag read $40. $20? Heck yeah. I said. "Okay," Renee said, "but it's not going in the house." "The Arizona room?" I said. She smiled and nodded. I gave the lady the money and rolled up my new rug. We finished walking through the swap meets but bought nothing else. Renee and I had met a few years ago. We both worked in the same building for different companies. Every morning, we shared a good morning as she left from her night shift. It wasn't until 2 years later, on Thanksgiving Day, when she approached the front desk where I sat and began sharing her experience of being stopped by the police on her way into work. She complained about the young officer and his question of, "Have you been drinking tonight?" And her response, "Oh heavens no, I'm on my way to work." I joked about it later about how she let him off with a warning. Being a retired police officer myself, I figured she was telling me because of that. I liked her spunk and soon asked her out. Been together ever since. Once we were home, I quickly went to the Arizona room and placed the rug on the floor in front of the futon. That was once the living room sofa in the beginning of our life together. It looked good. In the partial darkness, it looked quite real. Days turned into weeks. I sent pictures of my new rug to family and friends. All said, very cool. It was about a month later that strange things began happening. We would hear weird sounds from the backyard. Upon investigating, we would find nothing. What was really strange was that sometimes it sounded like the sounds were coming from the staircase rug. That's ridiculous, we thought. This continued for a few weeks, and sounds were getting more frequent and louder. One day I was home alone with our female Rottweiler, Ziva. We were in the backyard, just outside the Arizona room, when the sound started up again. This time, Ziva started barking at the noise and ran into the Arizona room to investigate. As I continued with my work, I soon noticed that her barking seemed to be getting farther away. I looked to the room and she was gone. I immediately ran to see where she had went. I could still hear her barking from somewhere in the room. As I approached the rug, I heard Ziva, but her barking was coming from the staircase rug. "What the hell?" I said. Called out to her, but she didn't respond. Acting beyond human reason, I stepped on the rug, and to my amazement, I stepped down a step. Had this rug become an opening or portal? I asked myself. I ran inside the house to our bedroom where my gun safe is, not taking any chances. I opened it and selected a Mini 14 rifle, extra mags, and my SIG P220 handgun, which I strapped on my side. The rifle had a good flashlight plus a laser sight. Geared up, I was ready to descend the staircase. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I was met with a foul smell of death. The air was thick and stale. I was now in what appeared to be a long cement hallway, about 12 feet wide and tall. There were large scratches on the walls and ceiling that resembled claw marks. I called for Ziva and could hear her still barking at something down the hall. I called her again and walked towards the sound of the barking. I soon found her. She was aggressively barking at something just outside the beam of my light. Once she saw me, she came to me and placed herself between me and whatever was down here with us. From the darkness ahead, I could hear a low growling sound, along with a scratching sound like nails on the cement. I said, "Come on, Z, let's get out of here." We turned to head back to the staircase, but it was no longer there. I started to freak out. The hall now seemed to go on forever, with the sounds getting closer. I led my dog forward. About 30 yards into the tunnel, I found bones and human skulls. All were in varying stages of decomposition. Some looked very old, and others not very old at all. Apparently Z and I were not the first down here. Just then, Z started barking ferociously at something behind us. I turned and lifted the rifle into the ready position. That's when we saw it. There before us stood something that just should not be. It stood only about 6 or 7 feet tall, and was almost humanoid. It had long arms that almost stretched the ground with long black claws that it scratched the floor with. Its skin looked like rotting leather and grayish brown in color. Its head and face looked like that of an anglerfish from the ocean's depths. Its huge mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. It reared its ugly head back and let out a terrible screech. Z and I jumped back. With great speed, it started running for us. I fired several rounds into its chest and head. It stopped, shook its head, and lunged for us again. I fired again and again. The creature dropped to the floor but continued crawling towards us. I approached it and put the 2 rounds into its head. It finally lay still. I hadn't thought of how loud gunfire would be in this tunnel. My ears rang with a high-pitched whistle, and I'm sure Z's hearing was affected as well. After several minutes, my hearing started clearing up, in time to hear more scratching and growling coming towards us. There are more of these things down here. I called Z and we started running deeper into this tunnel, with my weapon raised and ready. Not knowing where we were running, my flight mode soon turned to fight. "We'll make our stand here, girl," I said, backing up against the wall. I stood ready with Z at my side. We waited for half a minute when Z started ferociously growling and barking again. The thing was now in my light's beam. It was like the other one and was coming fast. This time, I wasted no time on body shots, but aimed only at its large head. After several shots, it went down as well. I knelt down beside my dog and gave her a hug. "I don't know where we are, girl, but we have to get out." I thought of Renee. What will she do? What will she think? Z and I just vanished off the face of the earth, like all these unfortunate people had. We started moving again very quietly. More bones, skulls, and rags that used to be clothing littered the floor. We soon reached an intersection in the tunnels. "What now?" I asked Z. She looked up at me like she knew what I was saying. She was the smartest dog I had ever owned. I'd received her from a friend leaving Arizona at the age of 1. She loved watching TV. And Renee's iPad, as long as there were dogs or animals to see on them. I patted her head as we continued straight into the darkness. After several minutes, we paused. Once again, we could hear more growling and scratching coming towards us. We ran and soon found ourselves at the tunnel's end. A cement wall stood before us. To our right was what appeared to be a very large room. We entered. There were piles of bones, skulls, old shoes, and clothing. These things have been doing this for a very long time. We hid behind some of the piles as several more of those creatures entered the room. The lead one raised his head and sniffed the air and began screeching. It knew we were here. Z started barking again, and our hiding place was now compromised. Trying to keep Z from attacking them, I stepped out firing. I had killed all 4 of them before a horrible roar came from the entrance to the room. There stood one of them, but this one was at least 8 feet tall, and its head was the size of a garbage can. Its gigantic mouth could have easily bitten Z or I in half with little trouble. It had a long tongue that it waved back and forth, throwing yellowish saliva everywhere. It looked at the dead creatures, prodded one with its head, and roared angrily. I don't know how, but I knew this was a female. Was it the mother or queen? I opened fire on it, but it seemed that my .556 ammo just wasn't causing enough damage to this monster to stop it. When it was about 10 feet from me, Z attacked it, and bit its leg hard, causing a dark, blackish fluid to run down its large leg. It screeched in pain, and hit Z with the back of its large claw, sending her flying against the wall. She limpered and lay still. "If you killed her, I will tear your head off with my bare hands, you hellspawn." It looked from where Z lay back to me. I dropped the slinged rifle to my chest and pulled my SIG 45. I shot this thing several times, and I could tell that the 45 ACP bullets were causing damage. It lunged at me and connected, sending me flying back into a pile of bones. The rifle came close and landed a short distance from me. With pistol still in hand, I fired till it was empty. Wish I had brought more ammo, I thought. The beast was soon on top of me and swiped at my chest with its claws, tearing my shirt and skin open. I cringed in pain, but continued to fight this thing on me. Is this a home to die? I thought. They say when a person is near death, his or her life flashes before their eyes. I saw Renee and future events I would miss. Holidays, our son John's wedding, and future grandchildren. And was my Z dead? Those thoughts gave new life to me. I started praying loudly as we struggled. I was in complete shock that this creature spoke to me in a raspy, wheezing voice. There is no God here. It said as it brought its head inches from mine. With my right hand, I found a femur with a broken end. I quickly grabbed it and shoved it up and into the creature's bottom jaw and up into its head. God is everywhere, I yelled. The creature reared back, making gurgling sounds as it fell back. Not wasting any time, I got my aching and bleeding body up and moved toward my rifle's light still shining in the darkness. I dropped the magazine, put in a new one, and approached the writhing beast. Knowing the little effect the bullets had on it earlier, I aimed at its eyes and fired all 30 rounds into its head. The last metallic sound of the empty casing hitting the ground was the only sound before an eerie silence. It finally stopped moving. I kicked it to make sure it was dead. I ran to where Z lay and fell to my knees. She was banged up, but still breathing. I picked her up, and we walked out of the room. Back in the hall, I slid down the wall with Z on my lap. Maybe this is it, girl, I whispered. Just then, I thought I could hear Renee calling out to me. Dear God, I pray she's not down here, I thought. Picking Z up again, I started moving towards the sound of her voice. Soon I saw a light about 50 feet away. It was the staircase. With all the strength I had left, I carried Z up the stairs back into our Arizona room. I fell with Z at my side. The room was spinning as I saw Renee lean over me. Then all went black. I woke up in a hospital room. My body ached terribly. Renee and the family were all there. I asked about Z, and Renee told me that she was fine and resting at home. I only told my family and Renee what had happened. Not sure everyone believed me. Even Renee had a hard time with my story, but knew I wouldn't make this up. The police determined that both Z and I had been attacked by some animal. A week later, I was released and sent back home. Renee helped me inside where Ziva greeted me with love and lots of licking. After a few minutes, I went outside and stood over the staircase rug. My thoughts spun. What was this? I was half tempted to call a few friends and assemble a tactical team and go down there again, and make sure nobody ever disappears again. Renee walked up behind me, still not sure what to believe. I'm so sorry I ever bought this stupid rug, I said. She smiled lovingly and hugged me. I'm sure she was grateful I and Z were still here. As we stood there, a faint sound arose from the staircase rug again. She looked at me with saucer-sized eyes. It's true, she said. In much pain, I reached down and rolled up the rug, took it to an open part of the yard, and we burned it. Never again will people be led into this dark hell. As we stood there holding each other, she asked, Tomorrow's Saturday. What do you feel like doing? With a smile, I said, Well, we could always go to the swap meet.